What if the boy everyone called a failure was never weak at all? He just hadn't found the right key to unlock everything he was hiding. Because when Kanagi Minato finally opens that door, the entire world shakes. 3 years of failing the same exam will break most people. 3 years of watching your classmates celebrate while you stay behind to clean the classroom, that leaves a different kind of scar. That was Kanagi Minato's life at the Hunter Academy. Not a villain, not a rebel, just a quiet kid who loved reading about legendary heroes, and couldn't pass the one test that mattered. The passer exam was the gateway to becoming an awakened hunter with real power. Someone who could fight the monsters crawling out of dimensional cracks. Kanagi had dreamed about this path since he was young. He grew up reading about the founders, the extraordinary warriors, who appeared a century ago when the Tower of Malevolence tore open the sky and unleashed horrors on humanity. One founder defeated 10,000 soldiers with nothing but a wooden stick. Another cast spells without speaking a single word. These were Kanagi's heroes, and he wanted nothing more than to follow in their footsteps. But every time he stepped up to that assessment machine, his mana readings came back as zero, unexistent, a hopeless case. 3 straight years of failure, and the school had quietly stopped expecting anything from him. On the day his class passed their exams and poured out into the hallway celebrating, Kanagi was alone, sweeping the floor. He didn't cry, he just felt empty. That emptiness got worse when the school gates opened for something he really didn't want to deal with. Hizaki Kaiza had come back, an A-rank hunter now, polished. The kind of guy that camera crews followed around. He was filming a documentary about his days at the academy, playing up the humble origins angle, and when the reporters pointed their cameras at Kanagi, Hisaki smiled and called him a great friend, someone who helped him study, who supported him even when things were hard. Every word was a lie. The truth was that Hisaki had bullied Kanagi relentlessly back then, beat him whenever he felt like it, used him as an outlet. But Kanagi didn't have the power to say that in front of the cameras, so he just nodded along. And the photos were taken, and Hisaki looked like a saint. Those memories burned in Kanagi's chest the whole time. After the filming wrapped up, Hisaki pulled him aside and said something unexpected. He would use his connections to arrange one more retest. Kanagi knew this was about image management. Another thing Hisaki could use to make himself look generous. But it was still another chance, and Kanagi was going to take it. Hisaki told him to meet at the founder's mausoleum that evening. The mausoleum was a sacred place to Kanagi, place connected to the very heroes he had spent years reading about. When he arrived, he found something that gutted him. Hisaki's men were digging through the tomb, picking through relics, looting everything they could find. Kanagi stepped forward to stop them, and Hisaki answered with his fist. A full-force punch from an A-rank awakened is not something a regular person walks away from. Kanagi felt things break inside him. Hisaki informed him calmly that this had been the plan all along. Frame the kid who was obsessed with the founders, the one who haunted the library, as the one who desecrated the tomb. Then he had Kanagi thrown into the river behind the sanctuary. That punch was meant to be fatal. As Kanagi sank, his body shutting down, he thought about every single day of training that had led to nothing. Every book he had studied, every test he had failed, every morning he had gotten up anyway. Then the bottom of that lake lit up. Not cold darkness, warmth, light rising from every direction. Voices told him he had been chosen as the vessel for this generation. The heroic spirits of the founders were sealed in that place, and in Kanagi's hand glowed the crest of nothingness, a unique mark. One that gave its bearer no power of their own, but allowed them to form contracts with the spirit of any founder. The voices offered him a choice. Pick one hero's abilities to inherit. Kanagi's answer was immediate. He wanted all of them. The spirits pointed out that was not how the system worked. Kanagi repeated himself. And then something impossible happened. All 106 founders were pulled into the crest at once. Every soul, every power, every technique sealed into that single mark on his hand. Kanagi exploded out of the lake. Hisaki and his crew were still nearby when the water erupted upward. One of them, absurdly, happened to be holding an umbrella when Kanagi landed in front of them. Something about his face had changed, calmer, quieter, more dangerous. They laughed anyway, called him a cockroach, told him he should have stayed drowned. Kanagi picked up a stick from the ground and started testing his grip, feeling the weight, running through movements. They mocked him even more. Somebody compared him to a movie action hero, sarcastically. Then one of them drew a real sword and charged. He never landed a hit. In under a second, the man's body came apart from cuts that happened too fast to see. Hisaki stared. His other companion, a heavier guy with serious magic capability, fired his most powerful spell. Against a target with no mana, it should have been over instantly. Kanagi pointed one finger, and a lightning bolt hit the spot without a word spoken. Silent Hound spellcasting. That was supposed to be impossible for anyone except the most legendary mages in history. Hisaki's mind went to the same place. That sword style. That lightning strike, these weren't random techniques. These were the founders themselves. Somehow all of them were now inside this kid, inside Kanagi's mind. The founders were already in chaos, 106 warriors who hadn't moved freely in centuries. All of them fighting over who got to act first. The legendary swordsman Hinoki Raichiru cut through the noise and addressed Kanagi directly, telling him to focus. He pointed out that Hisaki was barely worth the attention, and that the real problem was the bag sitting nearby, radiating something deeply wrong. Kanagi turned to Hisaki. First one punch sent him flying. Then the bag split open. A colossal creature crawled out, not just a monster, but one of the original boss-level horrors from the tower itself. Hisaki had stolen relics that were holding the seal on it, and now that seal was broken. Hinoki assessed it immediately. This thing was beyond S rank. Its poisonous aura alone could kill thousands, and it had been common back in his era. Hisaki ran. Kanagi had warned him exactly once not to do that. The creature struck before Hisaki had taken 3 steps, a massive tentacle punching clean through his chest. The same sword that had once killed a dragon couldn't even scratch the thing. As Hisaki died slowly, Hinoki put a hand on Kanagi's shoulder and offered to teach him his one-handed sword style right then and there. The other founders immediately grabbed Hinoki by the hair and accused him of trying to hoard the new vessel. Kanagi stopped all of it. He laid down the terms. No single founder gets exclusive control. His body belongs to all of them, shared equally. And one day he will surpass every single one of them. That was the deal. Hinoki grinned and the fight began. The founders took turns flowing through Kanagi's body, one granting sword precision, another granting speed, another raw strength. Power stacked on power, technique layered on technique, as the creature's limbs were severed and its hide pierced and its attacks redirected. Fire, ice, arrows, whirlwinds, every element the founders had mastered for over a century poured through Kanagi's body in sequence. When the beast tried a surprise attack from below, Kanagi's eyes flashed yellow and a great wizard took over, blasting it with lightning. Then Hinoki seized the final moment, grabbed Hisaki's broken sword and executed his signature technique, the Gyrotachi wave-cutting blade. The demon came apart in 2 clean halves. Somewhere in a nearby tree, a raven had been watching everything. The next morning, the most powerful awakened in the world, Ichihara Midori, aged 23, was sitting on a pile of monster corpses and making a phone call. He wanted to meet the academy student who had just solo killed an S-rank monster. The academy was still buzzing about the terrifying aura from the night before, the kind that had paralyzed hunters across several rank tiers, just from the pressure wave. Nobody could figure out who had stopped whatever that was. Kanagi shuffled through campus the next morning, leaning on a stick, his whole body wrecked from letting the founders use him. The recoil was brutal. Absorbing 106 ancient warrior souls is not gentle on a human frame. Inside his head, Hinoki was already mocking him about his promise to surpass the founders, pushing him to get back on his feet. Kanagi got up, quietly told himself he hadn't forgotten his vow, and walked to where a professor was waiting with news he never expected: a re-examination. Nobody had ever been given one before, no precedent, no established procedure. The whole school crowded around windows to watch as Kanagi walked out onto the field. The student who had knocked him down that morning was already running his mouth, calling him a failure, predicting embarrassment. The first test was a 100-meter sprint. Kanagi crossed the line in 1.2 seconds. The old record was 2.7. The crowd went quiet in a very specific way, the way people go quiet when they can't process what they just saw. Next came the 30,000-meter run. He finished in 1 minute and 17 seconds. Then push-ups, then the bench press. Test after test, every record didn't just fall, it got doubled. The students had stopped whispering. They had stopped doing much of anything except staring. Kanagi himself kept checking with Hinoki, wondering if the founders were secretly boosting him. Hinoki confirmed that wasn't the case. These were Kanagi's numbers. This was his body. In the headmaster's office, Midori was reviewing the file. The headmaster admitted that yes, the physical scores were insane, but the real problem had always been the magic assessment. 3 years of mana readings, all coming back as 0, completely undetectable. That had always been the real wall. Midori's secretary smiled slightly and said things were about to get interesting. Out on the field, the final test was set up. Channel mana into a large measurement fan and keep it spinning for 30 seconds. The record stood at 4,022 rotations. For the first time in his life, Kanagi could actually feel the energy inside him. Not just a vague hope, real sensation. Moving from his right foot, spiraling through his entire body. Returnable and shapeable. He discovered he could regulate the flow with his breathing. And when he released it through his right palm, something unexpected happened at a scale nobody was ready for. The fan began to spin. Then it spun faster. Then the counting machine started struggling to keep up. Then the wind hit the observer's hearts off that nobody could read the display. Then the machine exploded. Then the fan itself ripped free and launched across the field like a blade. It crashed directly into the headmaster's office window. The headmaster hit the floor to avoid getting decapitated by his own school's testing equipment. Down in the chaos, Midori watched from the wreckage of the office and did something unexpected. He chuckled. Because in the entire history of the Hunter examination, only one person had ever produced an immeasurable mana score. That person was Midori himself. The professor, still covered in debris, looked at what remained of his testing area and declared Kanagi had passed. The field erupted. Kanagi stood there staring at his own hands, trembling, finally understanding something that had been true his entire life. The power was always there. It had just been waiting for the right moment. Hinoki watched from inside with quiet satisfaction. The crest of nothingness, an existence that had been waiting for this specific moment for over a century. Then the ground shook. A pressure wave rolled over the entire campus, not from a monster, not from an explosion, but from a person landing. Midori had jumped down from the building. He addressed Kanagi directly and laid out an additional test on the spot. 1 hit. Land a single hit on the world's strongest awakened within 60 seconds. Any weapon available. No consequences either way. The weapons materialized from nowhere, a full arsenal. Everything from swords to spears to things with no names. Midori picked up a katana as a demonstration and sliced it in half bare-handed without effort. He said his body was sharper than any blade, with zero arrogance in his voice, just stating a fact. Inside, Hinoki was furious and demanded to take over immediately. Kanagi ignored him and grabbed a sword. He was going to fight this himself. Not because he thought he could win, he knew the math. Midori was comparable to the founders themselves, but to become a legend, he had decided he needed to rely on his own strength first. He charged. Midori dodged every strike with minimal movement. He was also on his phone, asking Kanagi about his social media, commenting that this whole thing was going to go viral. The students watching couldn't believe what they were seeing: Midori casually multitasking while dodging everything. But one student near the front noticed something unusual in Kanagi's movement. He wasn't just flailing, he was executing feints, drawing Midori into a reed, then switching the line of attack mid-motion. His body was moving with technique that nobody had taught him, flowing naturally from the founder's knowledge embedded in his muscles. 10 seconds passed. Midori put a single finger on Kanagi's forehead and flicked. The field behind Kanagi was obliterated. Kanagi had dodged by millimeters and was still standing, but now understood something clearly. At full contact, that would have removed his head. He pressed harder, speed increasing, aura surging in a way that caught Midori's attention. Students watching shouted that the cameras couldn't keep up with their movement anymore. 20 seconds in, Midori decided to tap Kanagi lightly in the chest. The impact threw him through a wall. Kanagi coughed blood, got up, and smiled because the fact that he was still alive from a hit like that meant his body yesterday would have died from it, which meant he was already different. He charged again. At 30 seconds, Midori reappeared beside him, apologized, and knocked him unconscious with a precise strike to the back of the neck. But Kanagi's hand found his sword on the way down. Midori sensed the shift immediately. The aura that hit him from behind was not the same as the boy he had just put to sleep. Hinoki had taken over. From inside, Kanagi's spirit watched in panic as his own body walked forward, with different posture, different intent. Hinoki told Midori the stubborn kid was finally asleep, and suggested they extend the fight a little longer. Midori's expression shifted from professional to genuinely engaged. What followed was not a test anymore. Hinoki's sword work was on a completely different level, unpredictable like flowing water. Every strike coming from an angle that didn't exist until it suddenly did. Midori was on the defensive. The students watching could barely process that. Midori on the defensive, during what started as a student examination. Weapons shattered. The field cracked. A building took damage when a missed strike hit the wall behind where a student had been standing seconds earlier. Midori grabbed a massive fan from the roof and launched it as a weapon. Hinoki sliced it into fragments with his dice-style sword technique before it reached him. At 60 seconds, Midori raised his palm and knocked them both down. But Kanagi had woken up during the fall, pushed back through his own consciousness, grabbed control from Hinoki, and in the single second before impact, deflected Midori's strike just enough to redirect it. Then he punched Midori in the face with his remaining good hand. One of Kanagi's arms was broken from the deflection. Midori stopped his own fist mid-swing, and deliberately brought Kanagi's knuckles the rest of the way to his cheek. Pass. Both of them hit the ground. The students stood in silence for a moment, then erupted. Midori's secretary Rin healed Kanagi's arm while Midori confirmed what had happened. Kanagi had passed. He had landed a hit on the world's strongest. That night at home, helping his mother clean, Kanagi tried to process everything. He lay on his bed, staring at the business card Midori had given him, turning it over in his fingers. His mind replayed one specific memory: Rin grabbing Midori by the leg after the fight and twisting it until he screamed, because he had implied Kanagi had agreed to something he hadn't. In serious pain, Midori had suggested they meet at his place that evening to discuss everything properly, the choices ahead, and the real enemies. Real enemies. Kanagi had spent years thinking hunters just dealt with monsters from dimensional cracks. He drifted off wondering what else was out there. He was jolted awake by Hinoki's shouting. The founders had gathered in his room and announced his decision. They were going to train him, not just use his body. Train him, make him their disciple. Before Kanagi could respond, the doorbell rang. He assumed it was Midori. He was wrong. His mother was on the kitchen floor unconscious. A stranger was sitting at the table, eating the meal she had prepared, complimenting the food while stepping over the mess he had made. He told Kanagi to discipline his mother and then introduced himself: Haitani Guru, S-rank hunter, comrade of Midori. He ordered Kanagi to pack his They were moving to the base immediately. Kanagi swung. Haitani dodged without effort and appeared behind him, asking if this was a challenge. But the rage that hit Kanagi in that moment wasn't about the fight, it was about the shoes. His mother's worn-out shoes that she refused to replace because she kept buying him new sneakers instead. The tonkatsu she had promised to make for dinner when he passed. Everything she had given up summarized in a stranger eating her food while she lay unconscious. Kanagi demanded to know what Haitani had done to her. Haitani said he had poisoned her, casually, mentioned she might only have minor side effects if she was lucky. Then he raised his hand to slap Kanagi. Kanagi caught it. Not a block, a catch. Smooth and controlled, using a technique from the god of hands, Kuduhuma, that he had absorbed through the founders. He used the momentum to swing Haitani through the window and into the backyard wall. Haitani landed on his feet, walked back in, and studied Kanagi with new interest. He recognized that move. He had seen it used against monsters in the old records. Something was very strange about this kid. Then the poison from Haitani's needles hit. Haitani explained his ability: phantom bug's poison. Deadly vision. Needles laced with toxins that he produced from his own body, capable of releasing deadly gas over a 5-kilometer radius. The version in Kanagi's system would kill him in 1 minute, unless he agreed to join Haitani's organization. Kanagi looked at his hand and called out to Valentine, the god of medicine among the founders. Valentine confirmed she was there, confused and surprised. Kanagi asked if she could teach him to neutralize it. She agreed. Then he started fighting. He named each technique as he used it: moves from Hinoki, from Shemar Kalkus, from Margit the archer, from Kudu Huma, telling Haitani directly that the founders he used to admire were living inside the kid in front of him. Haitani didn't get scared, he got furious. The fight that followed was the kind that rearranges a neighborhood. Palm strikes to the chest, kicks that sent a man crashing into a streetlight, dragon's claw slashes, Leos Lex's flipper leaving Haitani spinning in the air. And through all of it, the poison in Kanagi's system should have been destroying his nervous system. It wasn't working. Kanagi finished with a spell called Magus of Truth, the Meltus Silentius, an energy blast that the founders themselves were shocked to see. Haitani hit the ground and didn't get back up. Inside, Hinoki turned to the other founders. This kid had just copied all of their moves in real-time combat. Not perfectly, but he had absorbed the basics on the fly. One viewing, one battle. That ability, the speed of learning, was stronger than any of the founders' own natural talents. While this was happening, Midori had been busy. 15 hooded figures had been trying to reach Kanagi. Before Midori's people did, apparently representatives of someone called Nemo's guilds. Midori had found the last one on a rooftop and put him down. Then Rin reported in. Someone else had already been to Kanagi's house. Haitani, S-rank poison specialist, currently lying face down in the backyard. Midori arrived at the house to find Kanagi scratching his cheek and reporting that both he and his mother were fine. Valentine had neutralized both poisons in under 5 seconds, which, given that she was working through Kanagi's body instead of her own, was not a small thing. Haitani's claim about being Midori's comrade was confirmed to be a lie. Rin quietly repaired the window and the backyard wall while they talked. Then Midori sat down with Kanagi's mother and made her a promise. He was going to train her son until he had no weaknesses left. She asked him directly if her son would be in danger. Midori confirmed it without hesitation. She told him this was a child who had struggled for 3 years, and asked him to take it seriously. Midori promised he would. She let her son go. The next morning, a car was waiting at the gate. Kanagi's mother gave him his lunch, reminded him about laundry technique, told him not to sleep without clothes or he would catch a cold, and asked him to come home for New Year's. In the car, Rin drove while Midori leaned back and let Kanagi sit with the moment. Kanagi opened the lunchbox and found a small note on the pork cutlet. His mother's handwriting, a good luck message. He didn't cry loudly. He just went quiet and started eating, and the sting behind his eyes was real, and Midori and Rin exchanged a look and said nothing. They let him have it. When the car finally pulled up to its destination, Kanagi went still. The anti-prophecy headquarters, an entire organization built around a simple, terrifying mission: find the prophecies before they happen, and stop them. Midori explained that only a select few awakened were ever allowed through those doors. Inside, members of the unit were already watching from upstairs, debating whether the new arrival was worth their attention. One of them, a young man named Hinata Hikotaru, had already decided to find out for himself. Before Kanagi could even get through the door, Hinata dropped from above and put a kick into him that cracked the ground under his feet. Kanagi braced, absorbed it, stayed standing. Hinata looked impressed, and then immediately launched another kick, while explaining the history of the anti-prophecy unit. Mid-fight explanation: this was apparently normal here. Midori sat nearby and asked Rin for tea. Over the next several minutes, between blocks and kicks and a question about Kanagi's name, Hinata laid out what this organization actually was. Hunters dealt with dimensional cracks, monsters that wandered out of them, standard pest control. But there were threats beyond that scale: catastrophic events that were predicted before they happened, and had to be stopped before they started. Events like the pandemonium outbreak a decade ago, the Great Disaster in Kyushu 5 years prior, and going further back, the Tower of Malevolence 300 years ago, a full-scale invasion from another dimension. Hinata said the founders beat it back, but the current generation of awakened was weaker, fewer of them capable of matching that level of power. If the tower appeared today, humanity would likely lose. Kanagi asked the question that had been building: what were they supposed to do about it? Hinata's answer was direct: that's exactly why this unit exists. Prophecies, predictions of genuine catastrophes, were gathered from hidden books scattered across the world, analyzed, and acted on before they could unfold. The anti-prophecy unit existed outside public knowledge, operating at the highest classification tier. As of that day, Kanagi was a member. Hinata held out his hand. Kanagi shook it. Midori and Rin applauded. The other members, who had been watching from above, vanished without a word, which surprised Kanagi. But Midori just said they wanted to see things play out for themselves. That night, as Kanagi settled into his new room, the founders materialized around him. Hinoki announced the decision they had reached. They were going to train him, not use him, not just ride his body when convenient, train him properly to become their disciple. Every afternoon with the anti-prophecy unit. Every night, inside his dreams, in a space outside time, with the founders themselves. Sleep was no longer rest, it was lessons. Kagi accepted without hesitation. The missions came fast. His first went sideways almost immediately. He was assigned alongside the unit's top alchemist, Shinomiya Akane, and Hanada, to respond to what appeared to be a mid-level dimensional crack in Tokyo's Sumida ward. It wasn't mid-level. The crack tore open into a full A-rank level 3 disaster, the yellow journal spilling out monsters faster than the surrounding hunters could contain. Akane's area of effect spellwork was extraordinary, clearing creatures with mercury-based alchemy at a scale that left the local S-rank hunter, someone named Akane from a separate guild, completely stunned. Hanada moved through the battlefield like water through gaps, precise and fluid. Then the boss emerged, a creature designated Julia Ulner, well beyond S-rank, its sheer presence turning the air heavy. Hanada's kicks did nothing: anti-physical armor, complete nullification. As the beast reached for Shinomiya Akane, a hand caught its attack from inside. Kanagi had stepped between them and used a penetrating shock strike that detonated from within the creature's body. A rank boss, gone. Hanada recognized the technique: a penetration shock, the exact method for fighting enemies with physical resistance. The night training with the founders was already paying out in real combat. After the fight, Kanagi finally got Akane's name by pointing out that he had just saved her, so the least she could do was tell him. She gave it to him, clearly annoyed and clearly intrigued. The three of them didn't stop at the crack. They went through it. Inside the dimensional space, the monsters were denser, the terrain alien, and at the center of a vast arena waited a boss-level Minotaur, triple S-rank power, completely unaffected by their initial assault. Akane and Hanada pushed hard. The beast didn't care. Then Kanagi let Killik, the alchemist founder, take over. Killik, through Kanagi's body, used mercury alchemy, but not the same way Akane used it. He filled the Minotaur's entire body with liquid mercury, heated it to boiling from the inside, and let the toxic fumes spread through the arena. No brute force. Extreme temperature applied to a creature with maximum physical resistance. While he worked, Killik told Akane she was thinking too narrowly, that a true alchemist needed to control matter in 3 states simultaneously. The Minotaur collapsed from the inside. Level 3 prophecy defeated. Akane stood in stunned silence and demanded to know who Kanagi actually was. He smiled and offered his hand. She shook it, reluctant and fascinated. 2 days into this life, and Kanagi had already stopped a prophecy that should have required experienced full members. The director of the unit pulled them all into the lab, almost immediately after their return. A newly discovered prophecy grimoire found in a volcanic region, charred nearly to ash, analyzed through artificial intelligence and imaging technology. What they had extracted from it was incomplete but unmistakable, a new prophecy, targeting Japan, not in any existing record. This had never happened before. A red-haired member named Suo immediately understood and announced that the four of them would investigate. Kanagi learned later that this Suo was different from the guild hunter he had encountered. This was a member of the unit, intense, prideful, and clearly used to leading. On the drive to the site, Kanagi tried to rest. Suo told him to sleep if he wanted to. Akan refused to sleep out of stubbornness. Kanagi and Hinata were unconscious in minutes. When they arrived, it wasn't an investigation site, it was already happening. A massive magic circle covered the landscape. Skeletal figures were rising from the earth, still trapped inside enormous crystals. The pillar at the center was erupting with energy. Suo recognized it, a pattern similar to an incident 30 years ago when an entire mansion in Wakayama had vanished. At the center of the circle, a figure rose from the ground, Bandu Shijima. A name from history, the leader of the Dark Magus, an awakened who had committed atrocities during a peace period before being killed by Onmyoji. He had used the blood of his victims to draw a resurrection circle. 1,000 years in the making. He was back. A reincarnated demon king, absorbing sacrifices to grow in power. And he was disappointed. He had expected more sacrifices, so his power wasn't what he'd planned. He saw the anti-prophecy unit approaching, and thought they were more sacrifices arriving on schedule. They were not. The battle that followed was like fighting uphill in every direction. Shijima's dark arts summoned a death realm that dragged at Akane and Hinata with ghostly hands. His defensive magic blocked Kanagi's thunder attack cold. Suo's spellwork hit sharp, layered, technically perfect, and Shijima dodged every follow-up with unnatural flexibility. When Shijima pinned Akane and Hinata with spirit attacks and skeleton demons, Kanagi cut through his assigned demon and flanked him, landing a full punch to his face. Even Suo was impressed. But Suo refused Kanagi's offer to fight together. He didn't need anyone. Shijima hit both of them with his Magatsu's breath technique, a power beam that blew Kanagi through a tree. Vision blurring, consciousness slipping, Kanagi found himself pulled into his own mind where Hinoki and the mage were waiting. They told him to step back, let them handle it. It was too much for him. Kanagi refused. He said this was real, not training, and the only way to grow was to face real obstacles on his own terms. He looked at the founders and asked if they agreed. Hinoki laughed and told him to go show them what he had learned. Kanji came back onto the field in time to see Suo losing ground badly. Shijima had shattered Suo's sword and was winding up for the kill. Kanagi grabbed both Suo and the broken blade, threw Suo clear of the incoming beam, and in midair drew on Hinoki's one-handed sword style. He sliced Shijima's attack clean in half, then he cut Shijima's arm off. Shijima, horrified, screaming, regenerated, but Kanagi kept cutting, kept moving, kept adapting. He was not just fighting. He was learning in real time, combining the mage's shining flame with Hinoki's blade technique mid-combat. The blazing fire-cutting blade, a fusion of two separate founders' disciplines in a single weapon, emerged from that improvisation. The alchemist founder watching from inside called Kanagi an irregular. Even the mage was shaken. She had not expected him to merge techniques this cleanly, this fast. Kanagi drove the blazing blade through Shijima and the skeletal fortress he had summoned, splitting both from top to bottom. But Shijima regenerated from his own blood. And then Suo came from behind and cut his throat. Decapitated, Shijima collapsed. As his final moments pulled him back through memory, a frozen night under a bridge with a younger brother. A promise of food that never came. He saw Suo holding Kanagi's unconscious body. It reminded him of the brother he had carried. The loneliness he had weaponized into a reason to destroy. Looking at Kanagi, even Shijima recognized the difference. This boy was not alone. The barrier around the fight began to collapse. If it exploded outward, everyone present would be crushed. Suo gripped his sword. Akane and Hinata readied everything they had, and Kanagi, unconscious in Suo's arms, slowly raised his blade. Hinoki took over the body and executed the splitting cloud attack, a beam of blue light that fired straight into the sky and split the barrier's collapse outward into nothing. Outside the barrier, a red-haired man had been racing toward the site. He watched the blue light rise into the night and recognized it instantly as a perfect sword technique. No hesitation, no wasted energy. His name was Suo Makoto, captain of the anti-prophecy unit, Suo's older brother. The next morning, Kanagi was given a re-examination, the one meant to make him official. The mana reading blew the machine again. Nobody was surprised anymore. Makoto personally assigned Kanagi to his squad as a temporary member. Suo found out that his own brother, who had never once let him join his squad, had just recruited a kid who had been a hunter for 48 hours. He clenched his fists until his knuckles bled. The next mission was ranked 1. Global scale. The frozen Earth prophesies 17 locations around the world where a freezing effect was expanding fast enough to consume the entire planet if left unchecked. Makoto's squad, deployed by helicopter, jumped from altitude when the aircraft could no longer safely approach, and hit the ground in frozen mountain terrain. The cold was worse than reported. Even awakened members were affected. The squad moved like a precision instrument, coordinated, efficient, exactly what Kanagi had never seen in a team before. When permission to engage came, Kanagi jumped forward and kicked a monster in the head. It exploded. Some of these creatures detonated on contact. Kanagi adjusted, switched to his blazing fire-cutting blade, and started clearing targets at range. Makoto took note of the sword flame. That evening at camp, Makoto found Tagi alone by a fire, practicing skill fusion. He sat down beside him and instead of a tactical debrief, asked if it was Kanagi's first time camping. Then quietly admitted he just wanted to go home and pet his cat. His cat's name was Orb. The cat was, according to Makoto, a nightmare, scratching everything, vomiting everywhere, completely unmanageable and also completely adorable. Just like his younger brother Suo. Makoto said he hoped one day he could talk to Suo the way he was talking to Kanagi right now. Kanagi, an only child, listened and suggested, maybe treat Suo the same way he treats the cat. Makoto smiled, agreed, then pulled up phone footage of himself cooing at Orb like it was a baby. The next morning the boss arrived, the unknown god Comatus. A towering figure with an aura unlike anything the squad had encountered. Even the mage within Kanagi felt uncertain when she sensed it. The squad hit it with everything, perfect coordination. Jikaru locked it down, Kashi attacked from every angle, Kanekali drove in with the blazing blade. 0 damage. The boss counterattacked and sent Kanagi through the air into an ice formation. Jikaru locked down Kanagi before he could re-enter, telling him to stay back. Their job was not to help the captain here. Makoto drew his sword. He stopped the boss's full-force swing with one hand. He stopped the second one too. Then he took an arm off with a single counter. Hinoki, watching from inside Kanagi, was beside himself, wanting to copy the technique. Kanagi told him no. The squad deployed a barrier. Makoto channeled his red dragon skill and combined it with crimson light and incinerated more than half the creature's body in one movement. Kanagi watched, understanding that Makoto's version of sword flame was operating at a completely different level from anything Hinoki had shown him. He wanted to learn it. Makoto delivered the finishing slash. Then a flash of light cut across the field. Makoto's arm was gone. Jikaru had a hole through his body. Squad members were falling. One by one, a beam was passing through them before anyone could identify the source. Jikaru used his last strength to push Kanagi away from him, apologizing that his radar hadn't detected the attack. He crashed to the ground, hoping his captain could at least see where it was coming from. Makoto roared for his team to scatter into the terrain and identified it as a skill attack, something that couldn't be blocked even by barriers. He was severed, bleeding, and still giving orders. Kanagi knelt beside the dead, turned to Valentine in desperation, and asked if she could bring them back. Valentine apologized. She could not resurrect the dead. Kanagi took a breath, closed his eyes, told the founders he needed their help. Hinoki stepped forward. Makoto tracked the origin of the attack beyond 3 kilometers using nothing but heightened senses and rage, burning his own wounds shut with electric fire to stop the bleeding. Shouts the squad's third rule into the frozen air. Overcome your weaknesses. His scarlet blaze tore through the mountain terrain and exposed the attacker, a young man in casual clothes, standing there like he had been waiting. The young man absorbed Makoto's attack completely. He introduced himself as the 12th of Darkness, one of the 12 apostles of the apocalypse, an organization that existed to fulfill prophecies, the equal and opposite of everything the anti-prophecy unit stood for. Makoto had never known they existed. The fight was brutal and unequal. The apostle had a healing artifact, a relic from controlled government stockpiles, something no private organization should have possessed, that restored him to full health mid-fight. Makoto was down to one arm, a hole in his torso, still swinging. He broke the apostle's shoulder, nearly had him. Then the artifact healed everything and a punch sent Makoto to the ground. On his knees, reaching for his sword, a dark beam severed his remaining hand. And then the crystal formation behind the apostle shattered. Kanagi came through, backed by all 106 founders, every one of them furious. What followed was not a fight so much as a sustained refusal to let the apostle die and stay dead. The alchemist produced weapons. The archer pincushioned him. The founders took turns using Kanagi's body to kill the apostle over and over while his artifact healed him back. Then the artifact scattered and created a golden cage around Kanagi, the sand cage of time, sealing him inside. But Makoto was outside the cage, and Makoto was still standing. What happened next, no one expected. Makoto pressed his severed arms together and began to emit the same aura as Kanagi, a completely different energy, a blooming, a flowering of something that had been building for years. His master Ichika had once told him he was an unblooming bud that in this lifetime, truly blooming might not happen for him. She had hoped a stronger swordsman would appear before him to trigger it. Watching Kanagi fight had been that moment. Without a physical sword, using only his mind, and the refined culmination of everything he had ever learned, Makoto executed the lost technique from the book of Indomitable Hinoki's one-handed sword style's most advanced form. The apostle's body was cut in half, no sword touched him. Hinoki, watching, recognized what Makoto had just done and whispered genuine praise. Makoto thought of his brother, his cat, his fallen squaw. Then Kanagi walked out of the dissolving cage and took his hand. Makoto thanked him and collapsed. Midori arrived seconds too late, catching Makoto as he fell. Makoto died in Midori's arms at age 23. The weight of that silence was something none of them could put into words. Midori held his friend and remembered the egg training from their childhood. Makoto, patiently teaching him to control his aura, casually throwing eggs at him to get his attention. He remembered Makoto telling him that fighting for his squad was the only thing that mattered. Midori closed Makoto's eyes and said softly that he had done what he always wanted. He had fought for them to the very end. Kanagi knelt in the snow as darkness edged into his mind. The founders gathered around him. The mage said what everyone already understood, that the darkness was grief, guilt. The feeling of having carried borrowed power while real people died around him. Hinoki crouched in front of him and waited while Kanagi said he didn't want to fight anymore. He said that if he had let the founders fight from the start, no one would have died. Then he felt the memory of Makoto's handshake, the weight of what had been passed to him in that moment. Makoto had looked at him and chosen to leave the future in his hands. Kanagi looked up, and when he spoke again, the tone was different. He didn't just want to surpass the founders anymore. He wanted to surpass them with every moment he had, and from that point forward, no one else was going to die. A beam of light hit him where he kneeled. 1 month later, Kanagi and Suo were training on Mitaki Mountain, pushing each other to levels that would have seemed impossible at the academy. They had gone together to find Ichika Makoto's final sword master, Hinoki's descendant, and asked her to train them both. Suo had found his brother's diaries. Every entry ended with Makoto worrying about him, how the weather was cold, how Suo had been doing. Notes on small achievements Suo didn't even know his brother had tracked. Suo had read them alone in his room and curled up on the floor. He told Kanagi that from now on he was going to get stronger, so his brother wouldn't have to worry from wherever he was. Ichika trained them mercilessly, and after 6 months she told Kanagi she had nothing left to teach him. He had already learned everything. She joked that she should be asking him to teach her, but her real lesson came differently. When she saw Kanagi hesitate, measuring himself against Makoto's legacy, wondering if he could ever reach that height, she stopped the training and told him directly, he didn't have to be like Makoto. Every great master built on what came before them, always closing the gap without ever quite reaching it, and that was not failure. That was the path. Kanagi's path was his own, the handshake in the snow. The future Makoto trusted him with, that was where he had to look. 2 weeks later, the anti-prophecy unit announced a new squad captain examination. 8 candidates, a point-based system, 4 tests to find one person strong enough to fill the gap Makoto had left. What nobody knew was that one of those 8 candidates was not a candidate at all. Eva, the 9th apostle of the apocalypse, had infiltrated the facility using a skill called Heavenly Demon, the ability to replace someone's entire existence by killing them and taking their form. She had murdered a candidate, absorbed his body, his memories, and walked into the examination to destroy the anti-prophecy from the inside. Kanagi had already figured it out. The detective founder Azure had used his ability Theatrical Detective, which allowed him to replay past events, set a crime scene in real time to identify both the victim and the killer. Kanagi had confirmed the method, confirmed the infiltrator's identity, and then deliberately waited for the right moment. He knew there were 2 targets, better to catch them together. The examination proceeded. Kanagi broke the mana measurement device again on the first test, earning first place by default. The second test was hand-to-hand combat. A member of the Todoroki squad named Shikami, a physical irregular who had been dismantling monsters since he was a 2-year-old in a baby carriage, chose to face Kanagi directly. Kanagi used his redirectional technique to slam Shikami into the ground, with a shockwave that devastated the field, then followed with a penetrating luminance kick series that put him down for the count. After the match, while Shikami was still on the ground, Kanagi healed his wounds without being asked. Shikami, stunned, asked if there was anything Kanagi couldn't do. Kanagi thought about Makoto's squad members lying in the snow and said nothing. The third test was written anti-prophecy rules and regulations. Kanagi got 0 points. Shikami also got 0 points, which was at least a comfort. As the final test was announced, Kanagi visited the crime scene with Azure. The replay confirmed everything. The infiltrator's identity was locked. When the candidates gathered in an open field for the final stage, they were surrounded. Squad captains, unit members and Ichika, all positioned and waiting. The candidate named Shikami was addressed by the Captain Hibiki as Mr. Apostle. Eva dropped the disguise. She confirmed her goal, confirmed she had already obtained information from her host's memories, and announced she had no choice but to kill everyone present. She summoned her minions, hundreds of mummified bodies from her previous victims, each one carrying the physical strength of the original Shikami, and sent them all at once. Then Kanagi asked the mage founder to take over his body. The mage stepped into the fight with centuries of accumulated fury and precision. She electrocuted every single one of Eva's airborne mummies simultaneously. Not individually, all of them at once, without missing a single target. Eva stared and couldn't process what she was seeing. Hinata was outside tearing through the remaining minions, using everything Kanagi had been sending him in training messages for months. Akane was deploying stone golems and disassembling enhanced enemies with alchemy, at a level she hadn't been capable of when they first met. Suo was using Hinoki's sword style combined with new techniques Ichika had built on top of the founder's original work, carving through clusters of enemies with wide-area strikes. Ichika stood to one side, barely needing to participate, watching her students perform. Eva's escalated. She produced a coffin containing the preserved corpse of Hinoki Raichiru, himself the founder's actual body, and used Heavenly Demon to take control of it. All the founders went silent. The mage did not. She blasted the coffin immediately, then looked at Hinoki's spirit and told him this was the real deal now. Eva moved through the battlefield with the founder's full skill set and genuine historical power, executing Hinoki's dice slash, splitting the entire arena into fragments, even attempting the indomitable technique. Kanagi caught the sword bare-handed. Eva forced deeper into Hinoki's memories, trying to find something more powerful, and found centuries of accumulated destruction, of cutting through towers and seas and mountains, of a loneliness so profound it had hollowed out the man who became a legend. The weight of those memories shattered Eva's own soul. A destroyed soul inside a founder's body goes berserk, and the scream it let out was felt over 100 kilometers away in civilian areas, sending people running from evacuation alerts. The mage activated the Magus of Truth, a technique so powerful the world itself struggled to contain it. She stopped Eva's final dark energy swing, gripped the hand, and released a burning light between them. When the light faded, Eva was ash scattered on the wind. Kanagi took back control of his body to find his teammates cheering around a field full of paper confetti from destroyed card minions. The superintendent, Io, a woman, who turned out to be over 300 years old, preserved by a time-stopping artifact, because she had been raised by the founders as a child, appeared in a bright circle in the middle of the wreckage and knelt in front of Kanagi. She had been waiting for the founders' return for over 3 centuries. Hinoki immediately asked Kanagi to swap with him so he could say hello. Io recognized his voice instantly and started doing what she called the waist dance to prove it was her. The unanimous recommendation of every squad captain had already been submitted. Kanagi Minato, new squad captain. He accepted the cape, slightly embarrassed, and made a quiet promise to the memory of Makoto. Then Io called him into the everlasting vision hut and told him something that changed the shape of everything. Midori had gone dark. In Detroit, pursuing the leader of the Apostles, a figure designated Number 0 Midori had been exposed to a soul-hijacking artifact. Number 0 had taken over his body. The world's most powerful awakened was now being used as a weapon by the enemy. Number 0 burned New York with Midori's power, then India, then aimed at Japan. The entire Japanese branch gathered in the Pacific Ocean to stop him. Io revealed her true ability, the 8 Outer Mirror, a 2-stage spell that nullified any technique she understood and then copied it. She blocked Midori's attacks, reflected them back, coordinated the squad captains into a sustained assault. It was not enough. Number 0 outgrew every trap they set, learned Midori's body faster than they could contain it, and drove his hand through Io's chest. The cage shattered. Io was carried back to headquarters at the edge of death. The remaining apostles pushed through the front gate. Suo, Chika, Akane, Hinata, and the rest of the Kanagi squad held the line while Kanagi slept. Because Kanagi was in the deepest training of his life. The founders were killing him over and over inside his dreams, cutting him apart, and letting him regenerate, pushing his soul to a limit nobody else had ever approached. When he woke up, he went directly to Io, and healed her using the sacred medical tome ability, a technique from Warren, the sovereign apothecary, that sealed and restored even organ-level damage. He walked into the limestone cave to face Number 0 directly. The fight was everything the training had been building toward. Kanagi used turbulence, divine wind, penetration shocks, thunder combinations, wave-cutting blades, moon ring annihilation technique layered on technique, each one drawn from a different founder, chained together without pause. Number 0 couldn't damage him from long range. He couldn't outmaneuver him up close. When Number 0's healing artifact activated, and gave him 3 minutes of continuous recovery. Kanagi's squad was already there. Akane had analyzed the turbulence technique and converted all of Number Zero's attacks into healing energy for the squad. Every strike Number Zero landed became armor and strength for the people he was trying to kill. The squad hit him from every direction simultaneously. Then Kanagi and Suo stood side by side and executed the spirit-cut Hinoki's one-handed style, carried to its absolute edge, precise enough to cut something intangible. They severed Number Zero's soul from Midori's body. Number Zero tried his final gambit and jumped into Kanagi instead. He entered the most dangerous place he possibly could have. 106 founders were waiting for him. Number Zero's soul was erased. Midori opened his eyes to his own hands and told his friends he couldn't sense the enemy anymore. Akane ran at him and hugged him before he finished the sentence. But Kanagi had paid the price for the power he had used. The crest of nothingness went dark. He collapsed and entered a coma. His wounds were healed. His body was intact. But something worse was happening. Something from press against the foundations of who he was. Rion, the founder of Strategic Thought, spoke through Kanagi's body and asked the squad for one thing. Go inside, find him, and bring him back. They touched the crest and followed it in. They found Kanagi in a space full of flowers, being held down by dark tentacles, conscious but losing ground to a presence that called itself the Clusters, the beings who had created the tower 300 years ago, the original enemy, the ones who had been behind every apostle, every artifact, every catastrophe from the beginning. The squad didn't hesitate. They burned through the enemy's outer defenses, reached Kanagi, and Suo put a hand on his shoulder and told him. From that moment forward, they were walking with him, not behind him. With him. Kanagi looked at the people who had entered his own soul to find him, and for a moment said nothing. Then his crest came back to life, the founders returned, and the fight for everything ahead of them began in full. What followed changed the shape of the world. The Clusters were not just villains, they were a species at war. Beings who had crossed dimensions and star systems for 10,000 years, parasitizing planets and consuming them to grow stronger. Earth had been their first real defeat, 300 years ago, because of the founders. Now they were back with 3 centuries of evolution, and a plan to finish what they had started. Kanagi led his squad through a portal beneath the founders' mausoleum, to the planet Olet, the home world of Natasha Smirnov, a princess who had come to Earth specifically to find the owner of the crest of nothingness. Her world was being consumed, towers everywhere, her family hijacked by cluster parasites. Her brother died with a necklace in his hand meant for her. Her father fused with a piano and became a robotic monstrosity before turning to dust. Her mother fought the cluster inside her own body long enough to tell Natasha she was proud of how far she had come. The final battle at all its core came down to Kanagi using every single founder in sequence, switching between them in split seconds, chaining their abilities in combinations that had never existed before, wearing down the enemy called Yell, a first-rank cluster controlling a body far beyond anything they had faced. When the planet's self-destruct sequence activated, Natasha descended alone into the core, with her brother's necklace and her spark light ability. She got impaled, coughed blood, and pushed through anyway. The spark light hit the cluster heart and purified everything. Every tower on all it dissolved, every cluster presence was erased. The sky turned blue for the first time in months. The squad spent the days after feeding the survivors, redirecting river water, cutting timber, clearing rubble. Toki, the founder of Chinatown, cooking for hundreds of people through Kanagi's body, while Midori's moved wreckage with his wind, and Akane transmuted stone into housing. When it was time to leave, the children cried. The civilians thanked them, in a way that had no distance or formality in it, just people who had been given back their world. Natasha bowed to Kanagi and promised to rebuild. He told her she already had. Back on Earth, Midori returned to training on an uninhabited planet Rui had located through the mausoleum portal system. Skirner, the founder of Wind, had passed his entire power and knowledge into Midori before vanishing, and Midori had used it to defeat a second-rank cluster named Ella, demonstrating a version of Void Wind that controlled the entire airspace as around him, redirecting attacks before they arrived, accelerating himself to impossible speeds without tearing the planet apart. He understood now what it meant to be, and awakened not just a person with strong abilities, but a being at the edge of what humanity could become. He was still only at the entrance of that domain. Suso received a new crest from Makoto's spirit in a dream, sat with his brother's memory, long enough to say all the things he hadn't gotten to say, and woke up to a mark on his hand that looked fiercer than anything he had carried before. Kanagi began training on the floating island within his mental space, with beings called the demigods Valerian's entity and the founders of the divine beasts entities who existed before the era of the first ancient kings, who did not know human limits and were about to find out exactly where Kanagi's were. And at the mausoleum, Ru revealed something Kanagi had needed to find Kane. The founder of the Wanderers, the one who had taught Natasha her sparklight, had been found. He was already moving toward Earth, accompanied by Minamoto no Shiger, the founder of the Odachi, and Kanagi Itaru, the previous wielder of the Crest of Nothingness, Kanagi's predecessor. They had seen the cluster's main force moving. They knew what was coming. They called it the final battle. Somewhere beyond Earth's orbit, a cluster captain told his crew to rest. They still had a long way to travel, and when they arrived, 5 super-rank prophecies would need to activate in sequence before the main force came through. Everything that had happened, the exam, the lake, the founders, Makoto's death, all it. Midori had been preparation, not just Kanagi's preparation. The clusters had been preparing too, for 300 years, learning from every loss, evolving past every technique that had ever stopped them. The 12 apostles had been their forward operation. Number 0 had been their intelligence asset. Ella and Yell had been reconnaissance and field tests. What was coming was the main event. Kanagi understood this. He also understood something else. The founders had known when they sealed themselves in that lake. The crest of nothingness was not just a key to their power. It was a gathering point, a signal that pulled strongest beings across timelines toward the one moment that mattered most. His predecessors were already in motion. His squad was ready. The founders were sharpening their souls. Midori was somewhere on a barren planet, testing the edges of what the world could survive if he stopped holding back. Suo was training with a crest. His brother had crossed the barrier between living and dead to deliver. Ake was teaching Hanada advanced alchemy by letter, while simultaneously developing techniques Killick had declared were beyond what he had imagined a modern awakened could learn. Sakazaki was running probability tables on every known cluster rank and battle formation, quietly building contingencies. Iryu was complaining about everything and somehow still showing up. Ichika had taken on Hajime as an apprentice and was training him into something new. Rui was in the mausoleum library, reading every record he could find about the Wanderer and the previous crest bearers. And Io was having tea. She had survived. She was already planning. The anti-prophecy unit had faced a god-tier cluster inside a boy's own soul, helped save an alien planet, lost people who could never be replaced, and produced a squad captain who broke every machine used to measure him. None of them had stopped moving. Kanagi sat in his mental space, while Rex and the demigods pressed down on him from above, testing whether his body could carry what they needed to give him. From the island in the sky, Mel's watched. She had said it quietly once, and it bore repeating. Whatever Kanagi was, he was not ordinary. The crest of nothingness had been waiting for him for over a century. He was the boy who stayed behind to sweep the classroom, the kid who read the same worn-out books until the spines cracked, dreaming about people who had already done what he was now being asked to do. He had failed the same exam 3 times, been thrown into a lake, absorbed 106 souls, broken every record the machine could measure, fought the world's strongest to a draw, lost friends he could not save, and crossed through a dimensional portal to save a planet he had never heard of. And he was still learning, still getting stronger, still refusing to let anyone else die, still asking the founders for one more lesson, even when they had already given him everything they knew. The clusters were coming with their main force and 5 super-rank prophecies and centuries of accumulated adaptation. They were counting on the fact that Kanagi and the founders were as strong as they were going to get. That was the mistake, because Kanagi had not yet finished, not even close. He had stood in front of Makoto's grave and made a promise that the world was going to hear about. He had sat with Natasha in the ruins of a castle that used to be her home and asked her what she needed him to do. He had held Suo's shoulder in the infirmary and received the weight of a future his predecessor had trusted him with. Every one of those moments was still in him, burning steady. The crest was alive again. The founders were ready. The demigods were waiting to see if he was worthy. And somewhere beyond the orbit of Earth, the enemy was resting before the final push. The battle ahead was going to be unlike anything the world had faced in 3 centuries. The Tower Era had its founders. This era had Kanagi Minato, a kid who got thrown into a lake and came back carrying everyone, a captain who healed his enemies' wounds after he beat them, a vessel who told over 100 legendary souls they could share his body, but would never own it, the boy who chose all of them. Hinoki once said the stubborn one had already defeated them. He wasn't wrong, but the greatest test hadn't arrived yet. It was traveling toward Earth at a speed that made stars look slow. And Kanagi was going to meet it the same way he had met everything else, on his feet, with the founders behind him and his squad beside him, with his mother's lunch still tasting like the most important meal he ever ate, with the promise to Ru burning steady in his hand that every cluster, every apostle, every being that had come to this world to take something from the people living in it, was going to answer for it. The mage had said it best, Near the end of one of those long training nights, watching him get back up for the 100th time in an hour, he was angry from the bottom of his heart. Not the rage that burns out, the kind that becomes something else, something that lasts, something that drives, something that refuses to accept a world where the people you love keep dying for things they should never have had to face. That was Kanagi. That had always been Kanagi, the failure who failed the same exam 3 times, who stayed to sweep the classroom when everyone else left, the kid who spent every free hour in a library reading about heroes, not because he thought he'd become one, but because he genuinely believed the world was worth protecting. He had been right about that part. Everything else he had to learn along the way. He was still learning, and the clusters were still coming. 5 super-rank prophecies, a main force that had never fully deployed before, a species that had been watching humanity since before the founders were born. They had studied every technique the founders ever used, built counters, evolved past every defeat, but they had never faced the crest of nothingness with a Kanagi holding it. Not this one. Not someone trained by the founders themselves, loved by their superintendent, trusted by their captain, carrying the unfinished promise of everyone who came before him. The enemy's captain told his crew to rest. Kanagi was already training. He had always been training. And when the main force finally arrived, they were going to find out what a boy with a crest of nothingness, 106 founders, and a squad that refused to lose could actually do. They were going to find out. They had waited 300 years to meet the wrong generation.